each other's burdens, and in this way fulfill the law of Christ. I'll come back to that verse. I would say shortly, but it might be a little longer than shortly. So during the time of Jesus, there were many religious people, and many people, religious people, who genuinely wanted to live right before God and before people. And some of those people were called Pharisees. But something happened to those people. Something happened to the Pharisees who wanted to live right before God. Something moved from their heart up to their head. Something was missing, and that something that was missing led them to become something that God didn't want them to become. Was it self-righteous? Maybe. Probably. Let's see what Jesus, who's God, has to say on the matter. Matthew 23, 1 through 4. I'm reading the English Standard Version. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So practice and observe what they tell you, but not what they do. For they preach, but do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger." Listen to what the New Living Translation says. "So practice and obey what they tell you, but don't follow their example, for they don't practice what they teach. They crush people with impossible religious demands and never lift a finger to ease the burden." These deeply religious Pharisees didn't want to help anyone who had a burden, and on top of that, they'd put more on the people. You ever met any religious people like that? They tell you to live a certain way before God, but they don't. And when you cry out for help, they don't give you any. You ever experienced a religious person like that? Have you allowed yourself to be under a heavy burden that you are unable to bear? I'm sure you have. Listen to these freeing words. These good words from Jesus. Watch the text. Matthew 11, 28 through 30 says this. Watch it. "Come to me. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Can you imagine what those words would sound like to someone who was under what the Pharisees said? This is what the law of Moses teaches. This is how you need to live it out. Can you imagine what these words sounded like to those who couldn't bear what the Pharisees said the law of Moses taught? What do you think these verses, these words sounded like? What do you think they felt like? Who wants the Pharisee way? Who wants the Jesus way? Yes. Warren Wiersbe, he makes a good observation between the Pharisees and Jesus. Warren Wiersbe says this: the Pharisees said, "Do," and tried to make the people follow the law of Moses and all the other traditions. Jesus, on the other hand, says this: "Come." This is good. Come. It's an invitation. To come to Jesus means to trust Him. And the invitation is open to anyone who is exhausted and burdened. You exhausted? Burdened? And that's exactly how the people felt in Matthew 23, verse 4. Read it again when you get a chance. And also Acts 15 and verse 10. You see what's happening? is the religious people, the Pharisees. They're religious people. They're wanting to live right before God. They were putting a burden on people's shoulders, and the people couldn't carry it. It was too much for them. It was too much. There was too much stress. And when there's too much stress on people, they don't act in good ways. Have you observed that? Do you see that? I'm sure you've seen what people under stress look like, and speak like, and act like. Have we look on the news channels, or even within your home, your own home, or in your neighborhood, and see what pressure will do to people, and how people who are under pressure, how they live, how they act, how they speak. So the religious people here, under the Pharisee way, couldn't deal with the stress. The weight of it was just too much. They couldn't bear the burden, and they didn't act in a good way. Does that make sense? So Jesus saw the pressure that the people were under and says to them, "Come to me." This is good news. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Watch this. "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." Not the Pharisees. Learn from me. Look, if a person is under too much pressure, what do they want? If they're struggling to carry it, what do they want? They want it off them, don't they? Have you ever had to carry a big heavy weight? And you want it off. You don't want to carry it anymore. It's too much for you to bear. Or you want someone to say, "Hey, you want me to help you carry that?" The word yoke is a metaphor for the law of Moses. And what Jesus is saying when he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me," what Jesus is saying, let me tell you what my interpretation of the law is, and live that out. Watch this from a sermon that Jesus preached, which is in Matthew 5 all the way through Matthew 7. Listen to some of the words. "You've heard that it was said in the law of Moses, 'Do not murder.' But I tell you, my yoke says," my interpretation says what? "Don't be angry." "You've heard that it was said in the law of Moses, 'Don't break your oath.' But my interpretation of the law, my yoke says what? Be a person of integrity. Let your yes be yes, and your no, no. You've heard that it was said in the law of Moses, 'Eye for eye and tooth for tooth.' But my yoke says, turn the other cheek. My yoke says, go the extra mile." You know, when you get a chance, read Matthew 5 all the way through Matthew chapter 7 to hear the whole sermon. It's a really good sermon.